I'm going to show you how to get started with Trigger.dev. First, we'll run the initial setup, then we'll create a couple of interesting tasks, and then we will deploy those tasks to the Trigger.dev Cloud. You can see on the left here, I've started by creating a Next.js app, and on the right, we've got our Trigger.dev dashboard. This is the onboarding step, and you can see that we need to run the init command to get Trigger.dev installed in our Next.js app. So let's grab that. It also comes with the project key. Let's copy this, and in the terminal over here, paste and run. Where would you like to install the Trigger.dev directory? We'll put it in the source. We will install the hello world, and there we go. The init command we just ran has done a few things. It's added the config file here, but also in the source folder, there's a new trigger folder. This has got our example job, which we installed just now, and we'll get back to that in a second. This trigger folder is where you put all your tasks, and when we run the dev command, which is step 2 here, it will connect to the Trigger.dev server and we'll be able to run some tests. So let's do that now. We're running the dev command, the dev server's background worker is started, and over on the left here you can see our hello world task has appeared. Let's check out our task and do a test run. So you can see here that it has an ID of hello world, which you can see is pulled through here. We have a max duration set of 5 minutes. And then all we're doing is we're going to log out hello world into the dashboard. We're going to wait for 5 seconds, and we're going to then return the message hello world. So let's run that test. If I make this page a bit bigger, all we have to do is click test, select our task. We're running it in dev. This doesn't have a payload, so all we have to do is hit run test in the bottom right. You can see the live view of our task is running now. Here's our wait for 5 seconds. There's our first log, and there's our message, hello world. Dead simple. This was cool, but let's create something a little bit more interesting. In this example, we're going to use Fal.ai to generate an image from a prompt. And this time we're going to use a server action to trigger the task, and we're going to upload the image to Cloudflare. So before we run through the code, let me just demo what's actually going to happen here. So I've got 3 terminals open. On the right hand side, let's just run npx trigger.dev, and let's make sure we're running the latest, and then the dev command to run the dev server. In the middle one, npm run dev, let's run our site. And on the left hand side, I'm just going to paste a curl command. All this is going to do is hit our endpoint here with a picture of a corgi JPEG. And just for reference, there's our JPEG. This is the URL we're going to hit. So let's hit run on that. Jump back to our browser, go to our Trigger.dev site. Here's our task. If we click on it, we can see 1 is executing. And here we go. The Fal logs are coming through from the task. It's converting the image to a cartoon. And there we go. It's uploaded to Cloudflare, which I've got on the left here. If I just hit refresh on this, there we go. A new corgi should arrive. Yeah, there we go. Cartoonified in the style of Pixar, as per the prompt. So let's jump over to the code now and run through this to see how it works. In our first file here, we expose a post endpoint, and that accepts an image URL, and this request forwards to the server action. And in this file, we're validating our URL with a Zod schema, and then we create a unique file name, and finally we trigger our task, which is called image to cartoon. Now let's look at our Trigger.dev task, which you can see lives in our trigger folder over here. And let me just make this all a bit bigger so we can see what's going on. Bump the size up. Okay, there we go. At the top of our task here, you can see that we are setting up Fal.ai with our credentials. And we're also doing the same with our Cloudflare R2 bucket, which is actually using the S3 client. Next, we are creating a Zod schema to validate the URL, the file name, and the images. And then here we have our task. You can see that we define our task here with an ID, and also has the task function name of image to cartoon. You can see that reflected in the dashboard. If we go back to tasks, here's the ID that we've given it, and there's the function name. So that's how that's defined. Next, we're logging the start of our run to the dashboard, And then we're kicking off the Fal.ai step here. So this Fal.ai is using the Flux model, and it takes in a prompt, and here we're passing it the payload. This is an update that we get back from Fal, which we're also just logging to the dashboard. The next step here is a bit ugly, but we just have to extract the URL from the result that Fal gives us. And then we download the image to a buffer just before uploading it to the R2 bucket. Then we actually do the upload, and then finally we get our result back as a URL, which then we return here the final URL as well as the original URL. Let's just do another quick test to wrap this up. And if we go back to the dashboard, we can click test, and because we've already done a run, you can see that our payload has been remembered, and all we have to do is run the test again with the same payload, hit run test. There we go, just kicking off. These are the updates that we saw from Fal, and then the two final logs at the end when we've uploaded. And if we go back here, we should see in our cartoons folder, it's overwritten the same thing, but there's a different corgi. And that's it, a slightly more real-world example of how to use Trigger.dev. But let's keep going and let's evolve the task a little bit more. Let's say now you want to show the progress of the task to your users on the front end. To do that, we're going to use Trigger.dev Realtime. Here I've created a Trigger.dev Realtime example. It uses Fal.ai to generate an image, and we'll be showing the progress of this task on the front end here, so our user knows what's happening. Let's trigger a run so we can see this in action. On the left here, you can see I've got my Next.js app, and on the right, I've got my Trigger.dev dashboard, and here's our task here. So let's click into it. We can see the previous runs I've done, but we'll go now to the terminal, and on the right, let's get the app and the dev command running. So npx trigger.dev at latest, and then run the dev command to run the dev server. And on the left, npm run dev to run our app. So back to our app, we have a URL to paste. So this is the image URL that the task is going to take. This is just a picture of a corgi. So it's this URL here. And we're going to convert this into a different style. So given it's the season, let's do dress this dog for Halloween. Okay, hit submit, and if we refresh here, you can see job is queued. There we go, it's starting to run. We're actually using the Trigger.dev hooks here to show the progress on the front end. The image is generated, there we go, perfect result. And it's all finished here. You can see all the logs from Fal.ai on the right hand side as it processed the image, and there's the final output URL here. Now let's jump back into the code to see how all of this works. Let's start with our task. At the top of the file here, you can see that we are defining the expected result from Fal.ai. Then we're defining a payload schema. This is really handy because we're actually using here a schema task, which means that we're validating things like our URL here so that the task won't actually run if this is invalid. This is great to avoid your task doing a bunch of expensive work with an invalid payload. For the task itself, we're passing in our payload schema, and the run function takes in our payload. And here, the only step we've got actually is to subscribe to the Fal model, which is the Flux model, and then give it as the input our URL of the dog and our prompt. And then the only other thing we're doing here is logging out from Fal.ai the response we get as the image is being processed by Fal. At the end here, you can see we're just getting the URL out from the Fal result, and then returning the cartoon URL. Now let's quickly run through the other pages of the app. So this is our home page, and you can see that all it has is two inputs, one for the URL and one for the prompt, and this form triggers the action process image. The next file is our server action. All this is doing is taking our form data, which is the image URL and the prompt, which we saw from the previous page, and kicks off our Trigger.dev task. It takes in the image URL and the prompt, and then it redirects to the next page, which is the processing, showing all of the progress to the user. And it also takes our public access token as the URL as well. More on that in a second. Next, we have the page that shows the progress to the user and the final result, which is this page here. You can see the contents of this page is wrapped in a trigger provider which takes in our public access token. This public access token is part of our auth system, and it lets you specify which runs your front end can access. So anything inside processing content here that does a request to Trigger.dev through the SDK or the hooks will use the public access token. Finally, we can show some progress to the user. This uses our real-time hook. So use real-time run from our React hooks package takes in the types from our task as well as the run ID. This gives us access to all of the run data we need to create some UI. So here you can see we're displaying some different messages based on the different run states. And below we're using the run.status to conditionally display different loading states. And finally, we're using our payload URL to display our original image. And for our generated image, we're using the output URL. Now that we're happy with everything we built, the last thing left to do is to deploy our task to the Trigger.dev Cloud. We're going to use the CLI to deploy our task now. So let's split the terminal again. And to deploy, npx trigger.dev at latest deploy. And this is going to do a few things. It's going to update the packages, compile and bundle the code. It's going to deploy to Trigger.dev, and then it will also register the task as a new version. So let's hit enter. And while it's doing that, we should be able to see the progress. If we look at the deploys tab here, we can see it building. And if we go back to our terminal, we can see the progress. And there we go, we can see it's successfully deployed. And if we go back to our dashboard, we can see the deployment has been successful here too. The next step is we need to add any environment variables we've used in our project. And in our case, we've used Fal.ai. So if we click on the environment variables in the left-hand menu, we can add a new one here, click production. I've already got mine on my pasteboard, so save. And that should be set now. So the only other thing I've just done off camera is to deploy our app to Vercel. You can see we're on a preview link here. And the thing to remember when deploying to a service like Vercel, don't forget to add your Trigger secret key. In my case, I added the prod key here, and obviously any environment variables. So now all we have to do is do a test in production. So posting our image in again, and this time dress the dog for Easter. Hit submit, and if we go to our runs page, you should see our run starting up. Here's our UI again. All of this now in production. Fal.ai is kicked off, and there we go. Just generating the final image. Perfect, that's a weird one, but we'll take it. So that was Trigger.dev from a Hello World example all the way through to a real app deployed and using our Trigger.dev Realtime. I'll leave timestamps to all of the important bits in the video below this, and if you want any more information, check out the documentation or reach out to us.